Well, hello, this is Curt Pringle with the Talking Issues series. I'm glad you're able to tune in today. And usually we like to focus on public policy issues in California. And we're going to talk about one, but actually bring one that I care about maybe more than a lot of others. You see, California is one of the most significant agricultural states in America. The production of agricultural products is great here, and a lot of things evolve around it. But one agricultural product I really like, and anyone who knows me knows that, and that's wine. And when California has stepped forward as really one of the greatest wine producers in the entire world, there are very few people in this world that know wine like our guest today, a master sommelier. We'll talk about what that means. Master Sommelier, who actually got that title, one of 86 who had that title when he was able to qualify for that in 2007. My dear friend, Michael Jordan. Glad you're here, Mike.
Well,
Michael.
I am too, and thank you kindly. And I just can't believe, I know you have great memory, and you remember I was the 87th one. I can't even believe that. That's awesome.
Well, but I
Thank
mean,
you.
and what that is everyone knows of a sommelier, right? Someone who you see in a restaurant that gives you advice on wine, but there is a tremendous structure within that to learn not only wine and become a sommelier. Then there's a second tier of that, which is a second tier sommelier, or whatever the definition is. And I've known some friends that we mutually have worked with that have worked hard on their second level sommelier program. But then the top is the master sommelier. And I think, if I remember right, because I just had it researched earlier today, that there's only been, 168 master sommeliers ever in the history of America, and 200 and some in the world.
As it really about 300 now.
Okay, wow,
Yeah, so
you're letting a
about
lot into the
300,
club,
and some have passed on, but
right?
yeah, more people have have been in space,
Wow.
gone into space than have become a master sommelier.
Right. So tell the people, I know of all of the level of study and work and knowledge you have to have, but I think you told me once that I said, what's the biggest challenge of that? And it's you not only have glasses of wine that you have to know about them without any knowledge in front as to what their vintage was, in other words, the year, where it's from, the soil makeup, the varietal, what kind of grape, all of that you need to just have in your head and have that knowledge from grapes from Chile to grapes from Napa to Burgundy in France,
Truly.
right?
Yes, in the Master Sommelier exam, there's three parts: theory, service, table service. It's the only group that actually examines for service of all the diplomas for wine, and then there's the blind tasting called the deductive tasting. So that is three glasses of wine, three white, three red, 25 minutes. That's 4 minutes and 10 seconds per wine,
Mm.
right? To smell them, taste them, and then tell the master sommelier judges verbally all the descriptors that it smells like and tastes like, because they know what you're supposed to say, and you get points for all that. And then at the end, you got to tell them the grape, the village, and the vintage year. And if you don't get them right, we'll see you next year. You could take the exam once a year. I had to take that part 4 times.
Wow.
And I asked, after 35 years of doing this in the business and then being a sommelier, it's just, you got to practice, and that means drinking a lot, I guess, a lot of different wines, but
Yeah,
it's,
no,
it's nearly impossible to do.
and I think I asked you how many can you get wrong, and you told me none.
None.
You have
Maybe part of one.
part of one, you might not be precise, huh?
Right.
Wow, that's something. But your history was really in the hospitality restaurant business. So
True.
I know your dad was a restaurateur, and you grew up in his restaurants, and that's a good starting place to understand who you are. So maybe you could share a little bit about your New Jersey upbringing in
Oh,
the
man.
restaurant.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful that you asked about that. My father was Matty Jordan, aka Matteo Giordano. My grandparents came from Italy in 1910, landed in Hoboken, New Jersey. Had a father in the 20s, lived next door to the Sinatras. So my grandma was the midwife when Frank Sinatra was born, and and Frank's mom Dolly was the midwife when my father was born. Well, Frank, he was difficult all of his life to some people, and he was a bit of a rascal for sure. And he wasn't coming out, and so they had to call the doctor, and there was a problem with the birth. The end of it was a scar. I'm glad they never held that against my grandma. They knew it was Frank, because he was, they knew he was a force to be reckoned with early on. But he and my dad were best friends all of their lives. And when my father made it out here after the war and ended up in L.A., he called Frank, who got him a job as a waiter at the Villa Capri, which was a restaurant Frank owned part of back in Hollywood. When that mysteriously burned down, like many restaurants did in the 60s, I don't know anything about it. Sorry, I jest. But my father opened his first restaurant, Mateo's Restaurant. And Frank made my dad by just hanging out in there 4 nights a week, and everybody came. And it was a scene, on Westwood Boulevard between Pico and Olympic and Westwood. Mateo's opened in 63. And from the first week, all the celebrities started coming there, and all the red booths all around that dining room. On a Sunday night, you could recognize almost someone on every single table who you recognize immediately. They were all in there, the celebrities, movie stars, astronauts, jockeys, sports figures, anybody that was, really anybody, and the locals too, right? So if the president was in there, because John F. Kennedy, my dad cooked for him, and Frank was there, or if later, my dad served 6 presidents, so through all those years, if those folks were in there or the celebrities were in there, nobody moves in the restaurant, and there's other folks waiting 2 hours for a table. And my dad is like, well, I don't need any more. He was lucky, but he didn't need any more advertising. He needed more tables. And so I remember once a very famous astronaut, Buzz Aldrin, was sitting at the bar, and my Uncle Mike was running the front door at the restaurant. And Buzz comes up to my uncle, and I'm standing there, and I know who this guy is. Back in the 60s, the space program, rocket stuff was like the dream of every kid in my school. We grew up with that. And I knew who he was. A hero, man. He went to the moon. He's telling my Uncle Mike, come on, I'm waiting an hour already. I'm kind of getting drunk. I need to eat. Right. Where's my table? Oh, just 15 more minutes at the bar. So 15 minutes later, he comes up, and I was there for that too. And he says, Mikey, I got to eat now. It's been an hour and a half. It only took me 73 minutes to circle the earth. I'll never forget that in my life. So the restaurant was famous. Yeah. My dad served a lot of famous people, and I was lucky to grow up in the kitchen of his restaurant. Did every job in the kitchen, and then every job out front.
And that's where you established an interest or love in wine, or it's a...
Yeah, it was actually, the wine came on later. I really had a passion for cooking and flavors, and but as I got a little bit older, I started to appreciate wine more. And it wasn't really until I was running a restaurant in Newport Beach at the Four Seasons there that I became the general manager of that restaurant. And they told me, well, if you're the general manager, you won the wine program too. They didn't have a sommelier or a wine director. It was great. If you're the GM, you get to run the wine program. That was one of my first GM jobs, but I went and found other ones because you get to run the wine program. It's an amazing thing. But then the guy handed me the wine list and the inventory and said, okay, go. I didn't know much about wine. I learned real quick.
Yeah.
And the inventory.
And you did, because we met as you were the general manager or the head poobah at Napa Rose when Disney expanded in 1996, and as they built the California Grand Californian, the Napa Rose restaurant was certainly a marquee restaurant in Orange County, and remains to be. And you were the first one there, and that's where I met you. And tell me about that experience and putting together that restaurant, really with a a California wine focus?
Well, first I have to give you props, briefly, because I want everyone listening and watching this to know, man, you were such a great public servant here in Anaheim and are really responsible for being not only a leading force but part of the group that actually got things done that really heavily improved the city and paved the way for Disney to do the expansion that they wanted to do. And there were roads widened and everything else to make that good. But man, you were a big part of it. And we had so much respect for you at the time. I was so honored to meet you, Mayor of Anaheim.
Well,
We're
thanks. That's
there.
it. You're going to use up all your time on that. So let's move on to
Okay.
the Napa Road
But
and your work there. But
it,
thank you very much. Yes,
it,
sir.
it was a great experience,
Yeah.
Curt. I got to tell you, I've been grateful to be part of opening at least 17 restaurants, but that was the greatest by far. Napa rose in a boom time, when wines were people were enjoying wines, but we didn't know as much about wine as we do now, 24 years later. But we were able to pour dream wines by the glass in the first location that I ever heard of.
Right.
And back then it was things like Silver Oak and Camus, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Williams Sellian Pinot and Kistler Chardonnay. You could never get a glass of one of those wines. They were the dream wines on your wine list, or some of the first growths from Bordeaux or a Grand Cru Burgundy. We had over 100 wines by the glass, and you could pretty much get a glass of your dream wine at Napa Rose.
Yeah.
And we brought down the greatest chef we could hire from up in Napa, Andrew Sutton. What a great partner that guy was. And it was just such a wonderful time
Right.
for me. I just loved going to work every day, opening that restaurant and bringing wine country to Orange County, behind the orange curtain,
Yes. And after you graduated from Napa Rose and Disney, I know along that path you stayed in Anaheim and opened up the Ranch restaurant with my friend over there, Andrew Edwards, and the great work he has over on Ball Road. So,
Yeah.
so you start from scratch with the full credential to come in and build out a restaurant exactly how you think it should be.
Oh yeah, and it was wonderful. So at Disney, we followed someone's actual plan, but we ended up changing so many things. We changed the name and all of those things. It was going to be the Grand Napa, but we thought, well, I don't want to say kind of brag, Grand Californian Hotel, Grand Napa, too much grand stuff. We thought, well, it's more romantic if we name it Napa Rose, because roses grow in vineyards everywhere in the world.
Right.
And they warn the vintner of inclement, weather, and they beautify the vineyard, and they attract bees, pollination. Napa Rose, we all settled on it like, yeah, that sounds like a more romantic, very cool name. But the ranch was also a great project from scratch in the sixth floor international headquarters of his electronics company. Extron. You wouldn't expect to find a 10,000 square foot amazing steakhouse restaurant that has a 3-acre farm 5 miles away,
Right.
of its own, and 10,000 square foot saloon with like legitimate, country saloon with line dancing and two-stepping, just like they did in his home in Carolina.
Right.
No,
that
a great wine programming.
It really was your time there setting both those restaurants up. I mean, that is such a significant thing. But today you're the director of World Everything over at the Jackson Family Wine Group, and so is that just the ambassador role and serving a tremendous ownership group of wineries throughout America, but also beyond?
Oh, absolutely. Six different countries. The Jackson family started in the 80s with Jess Jackson and his wife at the time, starting Kendall Jackson Winery. And he had bought, he'd done a lot of things and dreamed all his life about being a farmer, and finally could actually afford to be a farmer, and bought some land in Lake County and started growing Chardonnay and made Chardonnay. And the first vintage was a little bit challenging, and as many times it will be. But he started a kind of a Chardonnay evolution, if you will. And that was in like 82, I think. And his Chardonnay that he's passed on, God rest his soul, but his wife Barbara and their kids and their grandkids and all the family. I love these folks. I love these folks. I joke and say they're kind of weird because they all get along together and they live together as a family. They run their company together as a family. And in my family, we didn't all get along that well. So I think, but they're marvelous folks. I'm so grateful to work for them. I'm the global director of key accounts, and I do a lot of wine education as well. And um, they own over 50 wineries
Wow.
internationally, and we're
Wow.
talking Italy and South Africa, South America, New Zealand, and Australia, and France, along with California and Oregon, and they are all family operated, family owned and operated. Each winery has its own vineyard, its own personality, its own winemaker, its own stuff, but it's all owned by this family that just loves the land, and I'm a fan.
No,
I get to work with them.
it's great. And they have some of my all-time favorite wineries now under their wing, and it's fantastic. But with the knowledge as a master sommelier, I mean, share with some people what what makes good wine.
Oh, you have to start with the property that allows you to grow delicious grapes. And for each different kind of grape, it may need a slightly different, uh, may need a little bit different temperature, a different climate, cooler nights, warm days, certain kinds of soil. All of those things matter. And once you are actually growing the right grape in the right location,
Mhm.
and the climate and the type of soil and the aspect, which way the land is tilted towards the sun, it's facing the east or the west or the south, all of those things combined actually are called terroir. There's one French word that describes all of that, the neighborhood, and everything about the neighborhood where that grape is grown and that wine is made. And all of those little things are so important, but the most important thing pretty much is the dirt and what's underneath the dirt, the subsoil, and the temperature, climate. And Jess Jackson knew that the best land in California for growing grapes is very close to the coast.
Mhm.
Cool coastal vineyards that have marine influence. And the farther inland you get, over every little hill or mountain range, there's a valley, and then a hill and mountain, and there's another valley. And every valley you go farther inland, it's hotter and hotter, right? So the Central Valley, okay, it can be 100 degrees there every day, where we've got Bakersfield and all the way up to Sacramento in that Central Valley. Well, they grow a lot of grapes there, good for growing raisins, good for tomatoes and cotton, not good for wine grapes because the best wine grapes need a much cooler, longer ripening season. So the coastal cool vineyards just said, wow, about 15% of all the great vineyard land in California is the colder coastal land. And 5% of that is on hillsides and mountaintops and what we call bench land, which is in the valley floor. It's up against the mountain. And it's the stuff that's either rolled off or eons of wind and rain and grinded off the mountain and rolled down, boom, down into the valley floor. So it's grinded up rocks and gravel and sand, what's on top of the mountain, but it's in the valley. And that's called a bench wall. Some of the greatest wines in the entire world are grown on benchlands in France and Italy and United States and California. But it's 5% of the 15% that's good is the primo best, but the filet mignon of vineyards.
Yeah.
That's what Jackson family has purchased over the years, and so those are the things that are most important. And then you need a good winemaker that's not going to screw it up once you've grown the most perfect fruit
Right.
with tender love and care,
Right.
right? And then harvested by hand, carried it by basket gently into the winery in the night before the sun comes up and makes it all hot so you don't have problems. Now you need a winemaker, and winemakers many times are very humble. They go, well, great wine is made in the vineyard. Well, of course, you got to start with good fruit
Right.
to make great wine. You got to
Right.
start with great fruit. But the hands and the mind of the winemaker and the ability to craft the wine and then blend all of the little lots that go into it is such an incredible skill set. Winemakers are just such brilliant people. Many of them started out as biotech, uh,
Right.
what you call rocket scientists, aerospace and
Yeah.
amazing brains, but like that didn't thrill them. They want to make wine in their garage and they end up doing it so well. They get great jobs in great wineries making killer wine for the world.
And in this art, government and politics is a part, just like every place,
That's
right?
right.
So, I mean, how is wine sold in America?
So we have great laws in this nation, and some that I don't know people think maybe antiquated, but we also figured out early on if this republic was going to make it, right, they needed to fund it, and so early on they were kind of smart. I'm not saying I made this up or I agree with everything 1,000%. Just calling the news like I see it. They were smart because they taxed bullets, they taxed cigarettes and tobacco, and they taxed alcohol. And they realized that we could tax all kinds of other things, but probably every one of the early people in this country wanted those three things. And so in order to do what they did, they created those taxation boards. One of the really good things though is that the BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, finally separated the bullets and the gunpowder and bombs and stuff from the alcohol. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, I found when you mix those, it's always
responsible.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, sorry, I digress
Yes,
for
exactly.
humor's sake.
Yes.
But now those laws are basic and they're the premise for the sales laws of alcohol and the proof of sales so that somebody's got to pay the tax on it. And, whether it's the winery selling it direct to a consumer, a guest coming to the winery and buying it right there and paying the full price for it and the tax, and then they go report the tax, or the winery can sell it at a wholesale price without charging tax to a distributor, a wine or liquor distributor, who is then going to sell it to a shop or hotel or restaurant, not an end purchaser. And that shop or restaurant is going to sell it to the actual consumer and collect the tax for it. So they really want to pay attention to collecting tax on liquor, alcohol, and wine.
Right.
So that's a big part of this, and they created what we call the three-tier system.
Yeah, and the question is that was mainly set up post prohibition,
Yes.
so that you kind of broke apart that producer of moonshine that then sells it and controls that whole channel. And
Right.
Some people today question whether we need 3 steps along the way, and for that matter, there's been times in which the state legislature has determined you don't need those
That's right.
3 steps.
That's right.
But and I think they're even talking about that a little bit more with micro distilleries
Yeah.
for harder alcohol.
Yeah.
That they
And
will
beers,
have a
too.
right to sell directly to a customer like wine does, because that
Correct.
wasn't a part of
Yeah.
the law. Wine got the exemption so that where you make wine, you can sell it to your clientele. But if you were, maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but if you were given an ability with all your experience to review that process, should that type of 3-tiered system of distribution be in place today? Or do you see the benefit of it? Or
I do.
is there a different way to do it?
Well, I think now that we are permitting both direct sale from a winery to
Right.
people that come to a winery or online or through correspondence to their wine club, buying directly from the winery. Larger wineries need the distributors to get that wine to they can't visit every shop, restaurant, and hotel.
Right.
And some distributors are nationwide and they have outlets in different states. Each of the states have different laws. Some states we can't ship to or sell in. It has to go through a state-run bureau. I think many people have ideas that there could be improvements made.
Right.
But I think the three-tier system actually is a very good, efficient system for larger wineries and liquor producers to get their product to market.
Yeah. But and you mentioned larger manufacturers, right? I mean, I understand because I have a lot of friends who are great wineries in California, but they're small production.
Right.
and therefore you only can buy it from them because they don't sell it through a distributor, because you can't sell it to a restaurant. I mean, a restaurant needs a guarantee of how many cases even to be able to carry it.
I don't know if that's really the case any longer with all wines.
Okay.
Now, with most wines that you might, if you're a restaurateur and you got a wine list, by the glass wine is something you need to make sure that you're going to have consistency.
I see.
But for the little boutique wines that you may only get 1 case or 2 cases a year, because that's all that there is for you to get, it's allocated and it's rare. Buying direct from a winery is absolutely okay, and many restaurants do, and love to. In fact, it's becoming more of a trend now for folks to actually have wines that many of us haven't heard of, a full list of discovery wines. Now, my humble opinion is that can be good, but I've always thought from the restaurant's point of view, we should have a mix
Right.
of comfortable wines that people
Yes.
recognize and can buy without having to get a lesson on wine before they pick their wine for dinner. Like my wife always tells me, and she's right. She's like, honey, try to pick a wine before the food gets here, please. And let's not hear the long story about it. Let's just get a wine and enjoy it with
Right.
dinner. But you can't have to be at every table talking to people about wine for them to order a bottle. I want a list where people see a bottle on there they love, order that. And if they have a question about something they don't know, call a server or a sommelier over to talk about
But
it.
isn't that the restaurants challenge that
Yes.
people become familiar with certain names and they go back to those names?
Yes.
So I mean, I talked to some of my friends at a restaurant here in Anaheim and about a few good wines that I thought they should carry. And it was like, people come in here, they only look for, Cabernet Sauvignons, Pinots, Chardonnays,
Yes.
maybe a Sauvignon Blanc. They don't want to try other varietals, and they always look for a wine that has a recognizable name. At least majority of people do,
Yeah.
as opposed to weird people like you and me, right?
Well, I think we're a much larger growing group now because 30 years ago, certainly people didn't travel quite as much as they have in the last 10, 15 years, say. Many people had never been to Tuscany or Spain or, Eastern Bloc countries that actually grow grapes and make great wines, or other countries. And I think once, after the 60s, people did start traveling more and more and discovering different wine regions. And while you're there on your vacation in the wine region, you taste something that's really delicious. It goes with the food beautifully. So we will pack a couple bottles in our suitcase and carry it all across Europe and then on a flight home.
But then when you get here, you can't ever get it, right? And it was that unique experience there, and all the Italian wines and everything. It's hard to, very few of them ever.
Were hard to get, but
Yeah.
now much more easy to acquire,
I see.
especially with the internet. And also, I gotta say, the generations that are coming up now are really not so cut and dried on. They want more diversity, more countries represented, more geeky, if you will, names of different grapes that we never even heard of and often can't pronounce when we're trying to read
Right.
them, because they're really compelling and delicious wines that go with food. And a lot of great restaurants today are really basing their lists on all of that more diverse and harder to find stuff
Interesting.
because they want to teach us how to eat and drink. We tried that in the 80s and it didn't really work, teaching you how to eat and drink.
Right, exactly.
So like you say, Curt, I think it is true that my best list would be many known wines that are easy and comfortable, that people find their favorite stuff and they can just get it without having to call on someone to help them. Right. And then a lot of other great discovery wines that are served at a great value, because boy, that's where we really earn our money, is when we get to turn someone on to the most delicious wine that they've ever tasted, and it's a killer price, really good value. They love it. I remember where I was, who I was with, who served me, the name of the wine. I go back the next night with my other friends because I want to be a hero too and turn them on to the most delicious wine that I've ever had, and restaurants just love that stuff.
Yeah, who drinks California wine? I mean, it's become much more of a international product, right? I mean,
Truly.
people from various different countries enjoy California wine, enjoy all kinds of wines, but maybe I could get an understanding of where you see the changes of, international users of this product.
Well, certainly all across this great nation, in all of our 50 states, but in not only Canada, they really love some American wines and bring many in from California and Oregon, south of the border, all the way from Mexico down to the tip of South America. They love also California wines and American wines too. But you would just really be surprised. South Korea, the amount of wines that they consume has gone way up from where it used to be, and they discovered that grapes like Pinot Noir and some Chardonnays can go so well with the savory, umami kind of savory notes and flavors in their cuisine. In all of Asia, especially you know China, now Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, all of these countries really love their California wines as well. And with the difficulties in the world today and politics and things that are going on, it's kind of put a little damper on that. But I have to say, up until COVID hit, uh, every one of those countries that I just named were increasing their imports of California wine specifically, and at big numbers, and people were beginning to enjoy them much more and buy them more readily and more frequently. I went all through mainland China to the great cities and the hotels. Hong Kong, I spent many trips over there. We were educating sommeliers with the Master Sommeliers because I had worked for Disney, and we were doing the first exam ever in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Disneyland Resort. They allowed us to use the property
Wow.
to educate sommeliers in Hong Kong. And then, and same thing in Tokyo. But we were bringing the first examinations of the Master Sommeliers to places like Singapore, Hong Kong, uh, Tokyo, Shanghai, Beijing, and in South Korea, and created a great market. Now, I mean, we weren't the ones that created the market. They're there.
Right.
They want these wines, but they either want, generally speaking, very inexpensive wine or the top wines. And the same thing from France. But they're importing much more American wine into Australia now. And they're also exporting lots more Australian wines into the United States. And like it's becoming more of a global community with wine.
Yeah.
And at both high end and the lowest end. They're shipping railroad container cars across the ocean from South American countries full of juice, and they're making that wine in an Asian country and selling it with an Asian label. And there's all kinds. If you can dream it, it's happening.
Wow.
Along with the standards of great wineries selling their wines in other countries.
I've always found, though, it's interesting traveling to the East Coast or even my relatives in the Midwest. The it seems California has such a great has so much wine opportunity here. I mean, every restaurant, every place you go, you can find good wines. But really, when you get to the Midwest, there's not that much availability. And on the East Coast, it seems to be, and maybe I'm just wrong or naive about it, but that you see a lot more European wines that kind of take the space
I
of
agree.
California wines.
Absolutely, and that's true. And I think that's, cultural, because where you live and where you go is what you know and what you're used to. The folks on the East Coast go to Europe because it's a much shorter trip. You're from California, that's a long trip. Whereas we tend to go to Hawaii a lot more frequently than folks from the East Coast. Then we go to the tropics. But however, folks go to Europe much more often, and folks from Europe have established their businesses more, maybe I would say, on the East Coast.
Right.
And especially with restaurants, that was always true. And so you would see wines from different countries and European countries, a lot more French wine, certainly on the East Coast. Boy, it was the same way with champagne. On the West Coast here, we would tend to consume more of our California wines and less European wines, although
Right.
that is changing.
Right.
And California wine is really being appreciated and imported into many countries now that before didn't ever bring in any wines.
Yeah.
Because as people are getting older, they're traveling, they're learning, they're tasting. You know, what I love is someone like yourself who really loves food and wine and the lifestyle. And because I think one of the greatest things, besides that wines are delicious and we're into the wine, it brings you to the table. Right? Food brings us to table.
Yeah.
Wine even brings us to table, keeps us there even a little longer. And as long as you're at the table with food and beverage and your loved ones and family, friends, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah. That's so true. I will, since I was born in Iowa and still have family in Iowa, and was back there with my wife and sister at a funeral not too long ago. In the little town where this was, near where I was born, the markets closed at 8 o'clock. So when we were done with the funeral dinner at church, we decided we need to go find some place to get a bottle of wine, and everything was closed. So I did fill up at the gas station and went into the little gas market, and there was a bottle of Josh Cab.
Wow, California wine.
California wine at a gas station in Pocahontas, Iowa.
Wow.
So that's my recommendation for we need to get into small towns in Iowa. So next visit. But anyway, I was able to find a good bottle of wine, decent bottle of wine at a gas station in Iowa. So I want to put that on your list as possible areas of marketing. So.
You know, I think I think that's a great idea, and I love that you said that. I remember early on in my career going to, let's say, the wine. There's a tremendous wine convention in Hong Kong every year, and it's big, you know. And there would be just rows and rows and rows. I mean, their convention center. I know we built with you, built out the one here in Anaheim because the conventions were getting bigger and we needed to do that. And really, we credit you for that. But I say another plug for Curt because I love Curt. But this one of the biggest convention halls in the history of the world, I think, is one in Hong Kong and the other one in Shanghai. And it's all open for wine. And we would see these whole giant rows with flags and flags and flags from Spain, and another one from Chile, and another one from Australia. And then the California had a couple of booths. That was it. And, we had an Austrian-born governor at the time who had a great accent and was in a lot of movies. Well, I knew him, and I told him when I got back here, hey, what's up with you guys? We only have 2 booths in the biggest wine festival convention on the planet, and Spain and Chile and Australia have whole rows with flags and just like thousands and thousands of bottles. Can you spare a little bit of marketing dollars for the California wine industry? It's the biggest industry, one of the biggest industries in the state, certainly bigger than Hollywood was bringing in money at the time. And so he looked at me with that weird look, and then he got like that blink in his eye and a good smile. And so now the California Wine Institute is very active, and others are in representing, far afield, our California wines. And so people are buying more, and we're shipping more. And don't worry, drink it up because we'll make more. Okay, exactly. Just saying.
Well, and it's always a pleasure for me to be with the Master Michael Jordan. I very much appreciate you coming in and talking with us today, and I always appreciate you. So thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, my honor.
Thanks.
Thank you.